Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and February's real, everybody. We made it to February. It's not just some imaginary thing told to us in story and song at the end of a never-ending January. It's actually here. Glad you made it. Eat as much Valentine's candy as you want. We've got a great show to kick off February. Virginia Feito is here to talk about her new book, Victorian Psycho, and to talk about Mirror Mirror, an episode of the Steven Spielberg created Amazing Stories anthology series from the 1980s. It's directed by Martin Scorsese. Sam Waterston stars in it. It's really cool. We have a lot of fun talking about it. And by the way, Victorian Psycho, one of the most buzzed about, hyped up horror releases of the year, worth every second of it. You should absolutely go pick that up. And since I'm recommending that to you, I'm going to recommend two films instead of a book and a film in our little recommendation section here because, hey, I saw two really good horror movies in a short span of time, and I want to tell you about both of them. The first is Companion, the new film directed by Drew Hancock, starring Sophie Thatcher and Jack Quaid. It is in theaters now. I caught a Thursday night showing of it when it opened. It's a blast. I don't want to say too much about the plot because I know people are dodging spoilers. If you want to read my thoughts on the film in a little more depth, I have a review up at Pop Heist. You can go find that. But for now, I'll just say Sophie Thatcher's great. Jack Quaid is great. Harvey Guillen has one of my favorite line reads of the year. It made me die laughing in the theater. So go check out Companion. If you're not heading to a movie theater, but you still want to watch a really cool new horror film, I recommend you go rent a movie called Bystanders. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. It was directed by Mary Beth McAndrews, my editor at Dread Central, and she knocked it out the damn park, y'all. It's a film in the rape revenge genre of horror, which I know turns a lot of people off, but you know, content warning, just to be clear, it deals with rape. But if you're able to handle that and you want to go into it, what you'll find is a film that builds on this long exploitation cinema tradition of rape revenge films and turns it into something new, something really darkly funny, something really creative. I love what Mary Beth did with it tonally in terms of pacing it and structuring it, and there's an almost Lynchian Twin Peaks vibe to the way it's shot, which I really appreciate. Yeah, I really enjoyed Bystanders, and again, if you are okay with the content, go for it. Go rent it. It's available now. Go buy it digitally. Support indie horror. Bystanders, good. That does it for recommendations this week. Let's head over to our interview with Virginia Feito. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is an author you are going to be hearing a lot about this year. She is the writer of Mrs. March and one of 2025's most talked about new books, Victorian Psycho. Virginia Feito, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk horror.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be so much fun. It's my pleasure to have you. I am a huge fan of Victorian Psycho. I don't want to give too much away for people, so I'm going to kind of let you take the lead here. Could you give our listeners a little tease of what they can expect from Victorian Psycho?
Yeah. So I guess plot wise, it's about a young woman, Winifred Naughty, who is hired at the very noble Enzer house as a governess to two young children, Andrew and Drusilla. So far, so good. The only kind of problem is that she seems to be a little broken inside. She seems to be carrying some what she calls darkness within. She has some urges. And so I guess the reader will have to discover whether the darkness controls her or she manages to control it, I guess, without getting into too much detail.
So the title obviously evokes certain things for horror fans.
Yeah.
Was that a title that you had in mind early on? Was that did I feel like that's the kind of thing that could spring into your head and a book would have to just follow it. So
right. No, the title came after, but I see what you mean. And actually, I feel like And I am starting to get asked this, and I'm like, shit, I think I should have, maybe I should have thought it through because I feel like it just came to, just kind of popped up in my brain. And I was like, oh, that's funny. Let's use that, And I didn't even, I never thought twice about it ever. Never thought about the repercussions, never thought about all the potential questions I would get about American Psycho and Brady Snell. I was just like, no, no, let's do Victorian Psycho. It could be any psycho, right? And this is a Victorian one. So let's just, yeah, it felt right. I didn't think it, maybe I should have thought about it more. I've seen some comments online. Well, people are like, wow, are we not brainstorming titles anymore? Like, are we just not checking these? We're just like throwing out the first thing that comes into our heads. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
Well,
pretty much.
I know that obviously people are going to think that, but in the same way that American Psycho delves into a very particular kind of person in a very particular part of
Right.
American history, Victorian Psycho is similar. And again, we don't want to give too much away, but
Hmm.
it is one of those books where the social conditions around Winifred are informing who she is and the choices she makes and the ways in which she is able to sort of upset the balance of the time.
That's
So
right.
how much how much reading did you do about Victorian England?
Yeah, oh, I did a lot. I did so much reading. I did so much reading. And the worst thing is now it's gonna maybe appear like I'm lying because I forgot like 95% of it, but I swear there was so much reading and that's part of what got me into this like aggressive mood. I just kept reading about violence and abuse and misogyny and the murder of children and the just abuse of women and all these like it was like a parody of itself. The everything I read, babies being found and shoved down toilets and children sweeping chimneys and working in the workhouse and it was insane. It was ridiculous. It was really and it appeared to be relatively normal or common, and I started to get really angry and I got into this weird mood and kind of absurdist where I started giggling at the facts that I was kind of reading, and it got me into this into the character, I think, of Winifred Naughty, who is kind of real observing this in real time in Victorian era and kind of we're watching it through her, so to speak. So I guess in that sense similar to, but also kind of the contrary thing to Victoria to American Psycho, where Patrick Bateman was kind of so far removed. He didn't really, I think, realize that he was like a cartoon of the like a parody of the era himself, so to speak. He wasn't really observant in that manner or like self-critical in that way. Whereas I think Winifred is kind of very aware in a kind of in an anachronistic way of what of what society hypocrisy is like around her and how that's shaping her. And I think she finds it very funny, and
Yeah,
hopefully so will the readers.
well, it's one of my favorite things about the book is your ability to balance all of that darkness. And I mean, from the very first page, you have this sort of prologue page that is all about death. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of readers and horror fans associate the Victorian era with this fixation on death and dying and the world
Mm.
beyond and all that stuff. But while you're getting into all this darkness and all of these really often challenging themes that Winifred is either observing or remembering or what have you, the book also has that it has this very juicy feel to it. Like if it is a
Yeah.
propulsive and very fun read, and you kind of can't wait to see what Winifred gets up to next. So, given what you just told me about uh, the sort of absurdist nature of your research and how far it pushed you, was it was it hard for you to strike the balance between, oh, this
Mm.
is very dark and this is very grim for these characters, and oh, but we're all gonna have fun here? Because it feels like it
Yeah.
would be kind of tough.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Thank you, by the way, for your lovely appreciation. It was tough to strike that. I didn't want to be too funny and feel so that it felt like I was copping out of the, of the violence and the abuse and the awful stuff. But and at the same time, it's called Victorian Psycho, and it's first person, and we're in a psychopath's head, and you can't cop out. It's gonna have to be awful and terrifying and grotesque, and just all impulsively violent in her brain all day long. But at the same time, I needed the humor myself as a writer, first of all, to kind of deal with these descriptions and awful situations, and in order to write about all the awful things she does with such gusto. And also it was important for the character, I think, incredibly important. She First of all, she's manipulating us into laughing along with her, I think. Charming as many psychopaths are said to be. And then also she's just having a great time. She just finds it really funny. Death and just babies dying and animals being tortured. She thinks it's hilarious. So I guess I needed to get into that headspace. And yeah, the balance was tough. And I tried a few drafts. Not gonna lie, the editing process was awful. It was awful. It was very traumatic. And I even tried a draft in third person and see how that would go. Not well, spoiler alert. And went back to first. And then I tried, upping the volume on the humor and then lowering it a bit. And then I went far too serious. And so, I had to try out a few times until I felt this is her. And I can't make her any less funny. And I can't make her more funny. Like I thought for me it was a correct balance, but I guess that's really subjective up to every person who reads it. But I do hope that people will find it funny at some time because it's meant to be, as dark as it may be.
I I found the balance to be wonderful, and it's very interesting that you tried it in third person because it's such a voicey book. It's
Yeah.
so driven by her and her own peculiar view of the world around her. Uh, and I think, you know, particularly right now in America, it will be a cathartic reading experience for
Sure.
more than a few people. Um,
Yeah, I hope it'll provide some sort of a escapism, perhaps, or I don't know, or a venting of sorts, maybe for
yeah,
those who feel rageful, as I
yes.
did when I wrote it. So yeah, it was the beginning of the when I started writing, and it was the pandemic had just sort of exploded, and so we were all locked up at home, and it was all very gothic in a way, and it was all very frustrating and very sad, but also kind of ridiculous and surreal. So I think I was in a very strange mood when I started writing this. Yeah,
As we all were in that time.
yeah,
So I mentioned this being one of the most talked about books of the year, and the biggest reason for that is it's really good, and all the horror people that I've talked to who have read it are really excited about it, and we
oh,
all
good.
are excited to talk about it. But another
Thank
reason
God.
is, yeah, yeah, I'm
Relief.
sure it feels great. It feels great on your end of things, but
Yes,
it's also very talked about because you have a film adaptation coming up, and
that's
it's
right.
already been announced that your leads for this are Margaret Qualley and Thomas and Mackenzie, who are
Yes,
amazing.
incredible,
Um,
insanely talented.
so what has you're in this wonderful position of being able to tell people, oh, the movie's coming out. We're already moving along on that path. What has the adaptation process been like for you?
Well, it's been really fun and collaborative, thankfully, because I have no idea what I'm doing. And so when director Zach Wigon came to me, he had directed Sanctuary. He directed Margaret in Sanctuary previously, and we struck up a great collaborative relationship, and we, I think, gathered really quickly that we worked really well together and kind of had the same taste, film wise, and we're kind of drawn to the same direction. And so when I sent him a very early manuscript for Victorian Psycho, he really loved it, and could immediately see the movie. And so thankfully, I was under Zach's wing for the whole process. And it was great because I was terrified that I was doing it wrong constantly. because I haven't done this before. So it was really great on him to kind of, you know, patiently deal with my bullshit as I struggled through this process. Which is a different language, right? It's like it's a whole other language. So it's like learning a new language, and it's trying to translate. I was trying to translate one into the other, and not by any means. I think the first rule for me with adaptations would be don't try to copy the thing. Don't try to like just, you know, do the same exact. Don't try to clone it. Basically, just try to translate it visually, which of course is easier said than done. But there's a lot of there are certain things that help along the way. You know, it's a whole team effort. So, for example, I don't know if there's no budget for a stable, well, then you know you're not getting the stable scene, so you can move on. It's a relief, you know. So it's been tough, and I'm still learning, but it's very fascinating. I love cinema so dearly, and I you know I'm just so excited that I get to watch the process and try not to fuck it up, I guess, along the way. So team effort, great magical collaboration so far, and can't wait to see the vision brought to life, Zach's vision. Um, and for you all to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. So we will use this as a transition point. You are an author whose book is being made into a film, and you have chosen a story for us today about an author whose books are being made into film, and
That's right.
who has a very different perspective, perhaps, than your very gracious one about Victorian Psycho. So Virginia has chosen the Amazing Stories episode Mirror Mirror from Amazing Stories season 1. And we're talking about the 1985 Amazing Stories, not any of the revivals or spinoffs or anything like that. So, Virginia, if you don't mind, could you
Yeah.
tell our listeners a little bit about what Mirror Mirror is?
Yeah. So as you said, it's part of the Amazing Stories anthology series created by Steven Spielberg. I think it was not renewed after the second season, I think, because it wasn't like quite it didn't have great ratings. But so this episode specifically is directed by Martin Scorsese. Listen, I mean, Martin Scorsese's like first foray into the world of horror potentially. And I think he had to like complete the shoot under like studio supervision in 6 days or something. And he was, you know, he had a lot of pressure, and he wasn't really at the top of his game here. He was coming from The King of Comedy, which had flopped at the box office outrageously. And he was directing an original story by Spielberg. So the mix here is incredibly fascinating for me. And then this is just a bit of backstory, but so the plot is, as you say, it's about this horror author who is like very blasé about horror. I think he's just not impressed at all generally, and he is essentially haunted by a man lurking behind him every time he looks in a mirror or in a reflective surface of any kind. And this starts one night, and he gets very upset, evidently, and he realizes that when he turns, there's nobody there. But when he looks in the mirror, the man is getting closer and closer and closer. It's kind of like a grotesque like game of statues, I think, or the red light, green light that we all know and love now, especially after a Squid Game. So he gets increasingly more upset and insane, and also the reflective surfaces get kind of more and more creative. Like there's a point where he sees the man reflected in a police officer's sunglasses, and nobody and everyone's upset around him, and he starts to kind of go a little bit crazy. And then his friend or girlfriend, I never really could tell, kind of tries to help him out, and she covers every reflective surface in his home, and she's kind of trying to calm him down. And then he sees reflected in her eye, the man finally gets to him with like a garrote. And so he suddenly, he gets him. And then, spoiler alert for whoever wants to watch it, but he essentially turns into the man from the mirror, who's this very obviously frightening, sort of deformed, cloaked figure, kind of like the Phantom of the Opera or something, something grotesque. And he turns into him, and he sort of pats his face and realizes what's happened. Obviously, you can't look in a mirror to confirm, and just throws himself out the window. And that's what this is. And this just terrified the fuck out of me when I was like 7. It was the first time I had nightmares. It was the first time, yeah, I mean, not first time I had nightmares ever. I mean, after, specifically about the man in the mirror. And it was like the first instance of horror affecting my real life and kind of modifying my daily routine or habits. Like I couldn't look in a mirror for the longest time. And just mirrors as like a horror device have scared the bejesus out of me since then every time. And I'm thinking Black Swan. I almost walked out of the theater and I couldn't handle it. And I remembered The Mirror Mirror by Scorsese. And then I remember when I came across Shirley Jackson's work, there was one story specifically that really got to me, and that was The Tooth, because there's a scene where this woman she's at the dentist and she goes to the bathroom and she looks in the mirror and she can't recognize her reflection in the mirror. She can't remember which one it is. Like there are several women in the bathroom reflected in the mirror and she doesn't know which one is her. Like, and that just well, please interrupt me because I can just go on. But like this is
no.
It's insanely terrifying to me and kind of formed me as someone who is very afraid of mirrors, I guess generally, and the gothic theme as well of like insanity and just the loneliness of going crazy. Obviously, nobody understands, nobody can help him. It's relentless, and it happens in the daytime, it happens at nighttime, it just happens. It's unstoppable, and it's like, no, you're not safe no matter how alert or hyper aware you are or how much you try to stop it. It will get you.
Yeah,
And
it is a remarkable piece of, and for those who've never seen it, it's 25 minutes long. It's not like an epic anything, but it packs so much into 25 minutes. And I should mention the man, his name is now I've forgotten his name. Oh no.
the character's name?
Jordan.
Oh, right.
Jordan Manmuth is played by Sam Waterston, like a
Yes.
pre Law and Order Sam Waterston. And one of my favorite things about it is it opens with a shot from, like we said, he's a horror writer, and his books are being adapted into movies. And the opening of the episode is like a scene from one of these movies because he's on a talk show and they're playing a clip. And it's so great because it's like Martin Scorsese's one chance to do like a Hammer horror scene.
Yeah.
And it's so fun, and I wanted more of it. I could imagine him like sitting there like going, "Oh, how would Mario Bava have shot this? I have to do my Mario Bava."
Yeah, and I don't know much about that opening scene. I is it Scorsese or did he take like an existing like horror movie? I doubt he would, but I don't know much about the opening scene. I thought you might be disappointed after that kind of ended, and it's like that's not the way we're going. Like that's not the direction we're going, and it's a completely different.
No. I feel like I think Scorsese shot it, but in any case, we then cut to like it's the Dick Cavett show. That's another fun thing about the episode is Dick Cavett plays himself, and they use the Dick Cavett show, and it's so funny because we now know Dick Cavett for these like sometimes contentious interviews from his talk show that you can go find on YouTube. And in this interview, he is clearly not having a great time talking to Jordan because Jordan he's a very cynical guy.
Yes.
Like he has all the money and all the success in the world, lives in this beautiful, like pristine glass,
like modern, like minimalist mansion.
Like concrete and glass.
80s heaven.
Yes. Yeah. And he's very much just like, it doesn't. I'm not
burnt out.
He's burnt out. He hates the publicity.
He's quite arrogant, right? He's also he hates the tour. There's that scene that he's talking to. He gets off the Dick Cavett show and he's being driven back home, and the driver is looking in the rearview mirror, which is already kind of upset. It's kind of sinister in a way. And I was thinking of obviously Travis Bickle in that at that moment, and he's complaining about all the stuff he has to do as like a world-renowned author, and then there's like a young fan waiting for him at the door of his mansion, and he's really mean and cruel with the young lad. So he's gonna get punished for it, isn't he? He's gonna get punished for not being afraid of
Yes.
anything.
Well, and it's the thing that I latched onto in watching it when I saw it last night is in his Dick Cavett interview. Dick Cavett is asking him about like the content of his movies and do you think your movies are too violent or too disturbing and he says, well, the thing about the movies is they're very literal. What you see is what you get. And
Mm,
I I don't know if we were meant to take that as a sort of picture of Dorian Gray, sort of dark
mm.
monkey's paw kind of thing, but he says what you see is what you get, and then the entire episode is playing with that notion of
Yeah,
like because this is the other fun thing is he says in the Dick Cavett interview, oh, I don't get scared, like
yeah,
I'm not this is all make believe, I'm not
yeah.
scared of any of this stuff. And
He says he fears real people. Real people I fear. He says my agent, my editors, my
my
ex-wife.
my ex-wife.
Yeah, that's who you should be afraid of, he says. Yeah.
And then he has to go on like you said, it's this very lonely journey because he has to essentially he knows what he's seeing, but no one else knows what he's seeing. And when he tries to explain it to, I think the woman is supposed to be his ex-wife, who he
Oh.
calls Helen Shaver. I'm not sure if it's meant to be his ex-wife or like his new girlfriend, like you said, but
Yeah, it was never really clear to me.
a woman that he is romantically connected to in some way. He calls her and she comes over and she's sort of willing to believe him, but only in the sense that she's like he's mentally ill, like he's had some kind of
Of course.
psychotic. He's had
Yeah,
some kind
yeah.
of break.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
she tries to like guide him to the mirror, which is a really tough scene to watch because it's kind of like, God damn it, Karen, like just believe like he's gonna die of fear. Like, stop forcing him to the mirror, woman. But she does it anyway. And then also, can we just say there's like a very inappropriate kiss when he's like all vulnerable and he's essentially about to die. And she just kind of gets a kiss in there. Like this is not the moment, Karen, to kiss this man who is terrified and going insane and about to jump out the window. But
he is
yeah,
in the fetal position on his bed in a house where all of the not just the mirrors, but
not just reflective. Yes,
every
every
potential reflective
surface,
surface to
even
the
the
point that
couch.
yes, and like there's a point
What was
where
it made of? I wonder.
in in uh in doing that and covering all the reflective surfaces, she goes as far as like spray painting the chrome on the
Yes, that was a
faucets.
lovely detail. Yeah, that was
Well, and
lovely.
it's one of the amazing things about the episode because it's Martin Scorsese and it's Martin Scorsese doing television in the 80s. So you're not like getting the full Scorsese amazing Thelma Schoonmaker editing or like the crazy camera work,
Right.
but he is clearly having fun playing in that sort of Twilight Zone
Oh
Hitchcock
yeah, yeah.
sandbox. And he makes you look at every reflective surface in every
Yes.
shot.
Yeah, he really does. And there's some wonderful shots in there. Like, and Scorsese's played with mirrors a lot after that, hasn't? Well, and maybe previously, but like throughout his career. And I'm thinking of the obvious, obviously Taxi Driver scene, but there's a lot of examples I think where he's played around with mirrors. I don't know. I wonder if that was something he was kind of drawn to from the beginning, or how nuanced the original story idea by Spielberg was. I wish I knew. I wish I knew exactly how far Spielberg went in his directive to Martin. Um, but yeah, it's a fever dream of a story. It's and also very randomly the cloaked man in the mirror is Tim Robbins.
Tim Robbins.
Played by Tim Robbins, unrecognizable.
Oh yeah.
Never would have. Yeah, if I had known this, maybe back then when I was 7, it would have helped.
That's the other thing we haven't really talked about yet is and I do wonder about this because this Amazing Stories was essentially Spielberg's chance to play Twilight Zone. And he has a lot of story by credits in the entire run of Amazing Stories. And you do wonder how much of it was him going, okay, this happens, then this happens, then this
Yeah.
happens. And how much of it was him sitting in a room with a writing team going, maybe there's a guy and he keeps seeing things in mirrors and
Yeah.
he can't tell if they're real or not. Something with that. Let's try that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and because it is such a wonderful choice that the figure that this guy sees in a mirror, we are given no context for this. Like
Whatsoever. Yeah.
it's not like a character from his movie. It's not anything. It's just a guy who
Yeah.
looks like the Phantom of the Opera. He's got a
Yeah.
wide brimmed black hat and a black cloak and a
Yeah.
disfigured face
Yeah.
and a garrote wire that he keeps pulling out
Yeah.
behind him.
He's threatening with the garrote throughout. Yeah. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. We have no clue who it is, but isn't that even more terrifying? And it's
It
also
is.
like what's the backstory here? It's so fascinating. Like, does this mean he is now going, the Sam Waterston character is now going to have to kill someone else in order to exit the mirror? Is he in the mirror now? Do you know what I mean? Like, what is the procedure? Like, are they around mirrors globally? Is it just the one? Like, how? Because it might be that he has been attacked and murdered by the mirror man so that the mirror man could escape the mirror. I don't know. But I'm reading way too much into this, but I'm just, it just freaks me out in a way I can't quite explain. And I feel like it has the capacity for many layers, even though it feels like a somewhat silly, potentially childish idea. But I think it really is very nuanced and complex. Is this just me justifying
No,
myself? But
I also had the thought of in watching it, I was like, is this some sort of like It Follows? Like, does he?
yes, it has a bit of It Follows. He keeps getting closer and closer.
He keeps getting closer and closer, and it also kind of reminded me a little bit of Talk to Me, which is itself
Mm,
kind of a successor to It Follows in certain ways. But
mm,
it has that thing of like, this is clearly, it plays as a kind of curse.
yeah,
And you wonder watching it, how exactly did he summon this curse?
right.
Can the curse be broken? Can the curse be passed?
Right. Do you mean because Talk to Me? Because I was thinking Smile when you were saying this.
Oh, Smile works
Yeah,
too. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, yeah. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Is it something that will be broken? But then it's a little more complicated, right? Because he turns into the man in the mirror, so we don't know where the man in the mirror has gone. Does that mean that actually, essentially, he's the man in the mirror? This is all a metaphor. He's his greatest fear. His, I don't know, cold, dark heart is his greatest fear, and his kind of cynicism, darkness catching up with him is what's going to kill him in the end. I don't know. Like, are we? I'm just, yeah, and the thought of the individual and the loss of your, yeah, of
This
yourself
is one of the things
identity.
that's great about these like anthology shows, and when they're done well, um they can provoke these kinds of discussions. And I talked to one of the earliest episodes that we did of this show. We talked to Daniel Kraus about a Twilight Zone episode,
Mm.
and it opened up this discussion of his imagination and how certain fixations came through in his mind because he saw this when he was very young. And it is really interesting the way that a 25-minute, like, this is the kind of thing that it was for mass consumption. It aired on network television. It was not
Mm.
like an art film or some kind
Mm.
of abstraction. It was just like, hey, this is going to be fun. We're going to show you half an hour. You're going to have a fun time. You're going to get a couple of scares. It's Steven Spielberg. Let's go, everybody. But
Exactly.
here we are, gosh, 40 years later,
Oh dear.
um, talking about it, and we're finding all these nuances in it, and it's just it's so well done that it provokes those questions, and it makes you wonder, what would the next 25 minutes of this thing be?
Oh
How would
gosh,
you
yeah.
explain it? Yeah, and it's
But it would also be such a shame, right? To like stretch it out and
exactly,
get
yeah.
the answers. Like, I don't really want to know who the man in the mirror is. I don't really want to know what his deal is or how he operates. I think I'd rather just feel the fear, the inexplicable fear, and just, yeah, live with it forever and just always think about it every time I look in a mirror.
It's
Just when
really
I'm really
funny.
safe.
you were talking about how we'll get to talking more about mirrors because that's a rich vein. But I just want to mention as a slight tangent, because you were talking about like formative fear moments for you
Yeah.
with mirrors in this episode. This episode pulled something up for me, which isn't a childhood thing. It's a something that happened to me when I was in my 20s. There's that scene in the back of the limo when he's telling the limo driver, oh, real people are scary. Real
Yeah.
people are the
Yeah.
ones that. So I was at the dentist. Speaking of Shirley Jackson,
Oh no.
uh, I was at the dentist. I'm in the chair. The hygienist is bent over me with her tools, and
Ugh.
she's talking to me. And she says, "What do you do for a living?" And I said, "Well, I'm a journalist. I write about movies and TV and things like that." And she said, "Oh, what kind of stuff do you like?" And I said, "Oh, I like horror." And she said, "Oh, do you watch The Walking Dead? My husband and I watch The Walking Dead every week. We love it." And I said,
Oh
"Yeah, yeah,
wow.
yeah. Yeah, I watch The Walking Dead." And she was going on about, "Oh yeah, the zombies are so gross and sometimes I have to cover my eyes cuz I don't like looking at the gross stuff, but we love it." And the thing
As
about
she
that show,
wielded her scalpel.
yes,
She-
she has the sharp metal hook in my mouth and she goes, "But the thing about that show, to me, is it's not the zombies. People are the scariest. You
Oh,
never know what a person will do." As she has the sharp metal hook
holy
in my
shit,
mouth,
that's terrifying.
and I've never had any kind of extant fear of dentist offices, but that was enough to get me. Um, so anyway, that's my story that this
That's
thing
a great
inspired, but
story. Yeah, they really just they wield too much power, right?
they
In
do.
that cramped little place. And yeah, and actually now that you mention it, when I go to the dentist, I'm always looking up in pain, obviously in fear, and there's always like something reflective up there, like in the big thing. I don't know the names, but the thing that they move around that kind of has all of it's like a big machine type whatever it is, and there's always like a reflective piece up where the maybe the glass for the lamp is or whatever, and I'm always looking at my mouth in that reflective surface and just to try to gather what they're doing in my face, because you don't know what they're doing. You never
Yes.
know, so I'm always alert, but as we know, that's not enough.
No.
Is it? You can never
No.
be too alert.
You can
It
never
will
be.
get you. Yeah.
They have drugs. They can do things. They can manipulate you. You have no idea. Anyway, um,
Maybe we're still at the dentist right now.
we might be. This might all be some sort of laughing gas hallucination. And
Well,
I'm
I'm having
just,
some fun so far. It's the
yes, me
most fun
too.
I've ever had at the dentist.
Um, so I never had a childhood fear of mirrors or any kind of thing happening in the mirrors. I've talked about this on the show before. I wasn't allowed to watch horror when I was younger,
Mm,
so I didn't collect that kind of stuff as easily until I
mhm.
got older. But mirrors are just inherently an odd thing. I know it's one of those things where you can look and read about what a mirror is, how a mirror works, and learn about every property of it, but you're still standing
Which,
there.
yeah,
I remember
I
when
still
I
don't
was
understand it. Yeah.
yes, I still don't understand it either. I remember being a kid and in my bedroom I had a dresser with a mirror mounted on it, and I remember leaning into that mirror and tilting my head to the side and realizing that I could see sort of the things that were next to the mirror were like being
Mm,
reflected, and like it felt impossible to me. It was like my entire
yeah,
room, even the parts that the mirror wasn't facing, was being replicated in this mirror, and I was like, that doesn't make sense.
that doesn't make
how
any sense. Yeah.
how is it doing this?
How
And of
could it?
course,
Yeah.
now like I looked it up and it's like, well, a mirror reflects its own reflection too, so the light is bouncing from all these different places, and I'm like, no, 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 that's
But
bull.
whatever, science, but still, yeah, no, it's surreal. I still don't, yeah, I still don't get it. And then obviously, if we go a little further inward, it's kind of it's like it's a very shaky reflection of reality. It's supposed to reflect reality back at you, pretty much, right? So if you think you look a certain way and then you look in the mirror and it's like, oh, well, actually, I didn't look as good as I thought or as bad as I thought or whatever. But it's such a, are we really trusting mirrors with this, with reality? Is it, it feels fragile, I think, as a like to diagnose reality. But this is probably because of my paranoia, because of all these horror movies and stories and such, where they kind of suggest that it's not the best way to judge what is real and what isn't, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely this odd, and I mean, even to the point, like on a very simplistic level, you look different in a cheap mirror than you do in an expensive mirror. You look different
True.
in a vanity mirror than you do in like a floor length mirror. It is this
Yeah.
odd thing of, and we have different ones in our house where I change
Right. Yeah.
between
I
mirrors,
mean,
and
if
I'm
that's
like,
the light, but yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah. You can't really trust it. Um, yeah, absolutely. And then it goes back to I mean, and I used mirrors a lot in my first novel, in Mrs. March, and it was always yeah, I've always found it very frightening, the possibility of as I said before, looking at it and just not seeing what you think is reality reflected back at you, or if you're smiling and you look in a mirror and you're not smiling in the mirror, but you feel yourself smiling. I mean, and that kind of thing that just really it's very nice. It's very, very much fever dream is just really happening sort of vibe that I've always loved in horror, because it's really intimate, it's really personal, and up to each person. It's very subjective what each person assumes is reflected in a mirror, and it kind of, your whole identity depends on it. So it's very, I don't know, I think we're in danger. I think we should just avoid mirrors altogether. Just from now on, just don't use them.
we can just cover them all in blankets, cover all the reflective surfaces. Don't
And the
look in
sofas,
a
for whatever reason.
and the sofas. Don't look in a cop's sunglasses ever for any
Just
reason.
don't look at anyone, right? Because the eye gets him at the end, which is so haunting. The fact that the creature gets him through the eye. And then which kind of, again, is also very iconic, right? The eye in horror, very psycho, and
Yes.
something also I think that I think, if I remember correctly, that I've winked to in the script adaptation for Victorian Psycho, potentially. I think there's an eye, because there's definitely an eye in the novel that
Mhm.
reflects a crime, shall we say? And I
Yes.
did, yeah, probably might very well have gotten it from the traumatic eyeball experience in Mirror Mirror, for sure.
So you mentioned at the top of this having nightmares about mirrors and nightmares about the man in the mirror. And I don't want to dredge up too much of like childhood trauma or anything, but
Yeah.
I'm I'm curious, cuz I like talking about how these stories inform imagination, obviously. And I'm curious, like, what shape those things took for you as a child. And I mean, you just mentioned
Yeah.
using mirrors in fiction and how that's worked for you. So how does that evolve for you over time?
Yeah, I mean, it was literally mirrors, of course, at that time, but then again, as I said, Black Swan kind of brought me back and couldn't look at myself in the mirror for at least a day. But then it evolved obviously into maybe more metaphorical concepts of the self, essentially, of identity, which is always what's fascinated me, and obsessions, and how subjective, as we were saying, reality is to each person, and how each person will obsess over something completely different. Um, and I don't know if this is answering your question, to be honest, because other than yeah, other than it being which is a very simple way of answering, I guess, but mirrors freak me the fuck out. But essentially, yeah, no, I think the self and identity and going crazy is what I guess I am most afraid of, which I think is also something that's very prominent in Gothic literature generally, and Victorian literature specifically, right? It's all about, as it was at the time, women going crazy and crumbling manners, and essentially feeling very lonely. It's very melancholy, very, very melancholic. Uh, I don't know if that's answered your question. I'm sorry.
No.
I'm going into a I'm going to loop into a mirror loophole. Um, yeah.
It was sort of an open-ended question anyway, but this brings me to something that I wanted to ask is one of the fun things about Victorian Psycho, and we talked about it already a little bit, is that Winifred is very self-aware. She is
Mm,
extremely it's interesting because you're so much of uh l- literature of the time, gothic literature and horror literature from that period is built on, oh well, she went mad.
right.
And
Yeah.
that's the scare. It's not like, oh, she
Right.
murdered 15 people and or she turned into a werewolf or whatever. It's she went mad.
Yeah.
And
Losing your grip on reality.
she lives in the attic now. She went mad.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of the whole thing. And it's this sort of nebulous idea of madness, and as we know from looking back at that era, like we don't know if they actually went mad or if maybe they just maybe needed to
Yeah.
talk to somebody.
Yeah, exactly. So totally, yeah. Maybe they were just locked up in a room for months and months and sort of yeah, their all their hobbies were ripped away from them like in the yellow wallpaper.
Yes.
Uh were not allowed to do anything that would have brought them joy. So yeah.
Well,
I,
it's very interesting that we're talking about mirrors and we're talking about the ways that they present different versions of the self.
yeah.
And you wrote a book about a woman who is probably not in the best mental state, but she's very aware of who
Yeah.
she is and what she wants. And she's
Yes.
also crucially very aware that everyone in that house has a true self and a self that they present.
Absolutely. And yeah,
And
and she's
I
aware that she presents one as well that she's hiding one. She's kind of literally in some scenes appears to be swallowing herself. Like she visualizes it as a creature, like her darkness that she's swallowed and has eyes and kind of writhes around inside her. So yeah, she's very it's like a step forward maybe from Mrs. March, who was a character who refused to see that she was losing her grip and that she was presenting kind of a fake persona uh for the benefit of other people's opinions and to in order to impress her important friends or whatever. And this is Winifred Naughty is absolutely aware. And I guess maybe I don't know if the frightening thing is it still doesn't help, right? Like her being aware of it. I don't know if it makes it better, but I do envy her joy because she seems to have let go and is very happy now and very relaxed. I am not this way in my
yes.
day to day. I have no chill, as they say. And I kind of envy her a little bit for being
Yeah.
so self-aware.
Well, this is what I wanted to get at is yeah, we know that she's not necessarily a good person or a nice person or like
Mm,
a person that you would necessarily trust, but she is clearly very zen about who she is and what she wants and why she's
it's
doing what
admirable.
she's
Yeah.
doing. Yeah, it is. It's admirable. And it is this going back to Mirror Mirror, it's this we were just sort of talking about, is this a metaphorical thing that's creeping up on him?
Mm,
Is this like, hey, you need to embrace what you are, okay? You need to stop
right.
running from this idea that you're this guy who writes horror novel. Like you should
Mm,
relish this. You should enjoy this.
right.
And he's running, is he running from his own like monsters?
Mm,
And it is this wonderful question of like, because so many of us run from our reflections. So many of us see ourselves in the mirror and go like, "Oh God, I look like hell. I'm gonna
yes.
avoid mirrors for the rest of the day." Um,
And metaphorically, I guess you could say as well, right? And
yes, yes.
so many of
So
us, yeah, it's tough to be self-critical and
I
to
think
not
I
be in denial with one's faults, I guess.
Yes, this is what I was getting at. Is Winifred is not necessarily all that self-critical, but is it better to live life her way, do you think?
Right. I mean, not I think she goes a little too far, right? I think
Mhm.
every extreme is bad and she takes it way too far and obviously is hurting a lot of vulnerable innocent people. But if we're being, if we're talking about silly things like an email that took me 45 minutes to write this morning because I didn't want to, offend anyone, or I was just like wary of them thinking I'm an asshole, or, I could have edited that for 45 minutes, I swear. It would be great if maybe I didn't care as deeply about every single thing, and about all my faults constantly all the time. A little bit, but of course it doesn't bode well for her either, that she just gets to do whatever the hell she feels like at any given time and hurt people, obviously not. But maybe for the emails.
For the emails, yes. We all wish we could be more like Winifred when it comes to emails and customer service situations
Exactly.
and
Right. And just speaking out a little bit.
in airports. It would be great. Um, I know I have to let you go because you're in the middle of promoting a book that everyone wants to talk about.
Oh,
But before I let you go, I wanted to ask, now that you've done this huge Victorian, uh, all this research reading and all
yeah.
this stuff,
Yeah.
and what are you working on now? Are you pivoting completely? Are you thinking about more Victorian stories? Where are you at?
No, I think I'm okay now with the Victorian stuff.
Got
The
it
guy
all
I got
out?
I think so. Yeah, I think, as I said, it's such a shame because now I can barely remember any of it, but it did get to a very obsessive point, and I'm a very obsessive person generally. So the process was, I got to a point where I had to remind myself this isn't really a historical novel. Like, stop it with I had to research the etymology of every single line I wrote, and it was kind of exhausting. But right now I'm pretty much busy with both adaptations of both my novels simultaneously. So I'm kind of in the script world right now, and I haven't delved deeply into a third novel. But I have like, I don't know, I've flirted with a couple of ideas. One of them is also not um a current time period. So I think like that one's losing right now just because I'm exhausted. I can't get into another time period. I think I die. And the others are more current. So we'll see potentially. But I'm still, I don't want to like frighten the I don't know what to call it, the muse, the inspiration, or just the motivation, which I picture as a very kind of frightened squirrel that I have to manipulate into working. So I don't want to scare it off. So I'm just gonna say out loud so it can hear me that we're okay. We're not working on anything specific right now. It's fine. It's okay. And we'll see. But right now I am still in the script world of both Smart and Victorian Psycho.
Well, we are very excited to see the adaptations, but for now, by the time you hear this, listeners, Victorian Psycho will be in bookstores everywhere. Go pick it up. It's wonderful. Virginia, before we let you go, will you please let people know where they can find you online or out on book tour or whatever you have coming up?
Oh, sure. I don't have I don't have a big online presence. I don't have social media, but there is a website that I do update. I think nobody visits it ever, but it's virginiafeito.com. And I do update it in terms of events and such. And I'll be doing some online stuff that everyone can sort of go watch. It's all up there. And then I'll be doing a UK tour if anyone from the UK is listening. So I'll be there in person. So you
All
guys can
right.
check it out on the website.
Our guest has been Virginia Feito. Virginia, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun. I'm so freaked out generally right now. Like, the sun has gone down here in Madrid where I live. And and I'm freaking out about looking in the mirror. I swear, because it would be so ironic and so so very amazing stories if I now look in the mirror and see something there.
We hope not. Great to have
Yeah.
you on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks once again to Virginia Feito for being a guest on the show. It was a blast to talk to her. Victorian Psycho is available now, and the Victorian Psycho film is coming soon. Look out for that. Pick up the book. Trust me, it's great. If you want to keep track of everything we've got going on, you can find us on social media. We are at Scares Shaped Us on Blue Sky. That's where we're doing most of our posting now, so that's really where you want to follow us if you want to keep track of everything going on. We're also still on Twitter at Scares Shaped Us. It's mostly just new episode updates at this point, but we are over there if you want to follow us. We are the Scares That Shaped Us on Facebook. We're also the Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube. If you like getting your podcasts on YouTube, subscribe, like, smash those buttons, and you will get every episode of the show that way if that's how you prefer it. And if you have anything you want to ask me, anything you want to comment on, any suggestions, anything like that, you can email us at scaresthatshapedUspodcast@gmail.com. Always happy to hear from everybody. That's it for us this week. Next week, February 12th, we will have new friend of the show, Adam Caesar, on to talk about the Clown in a Cornfield books, the upcoming Clown in a Cornfield movie, and one of the best slasher movies ever, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Again, that's February 12th at noon Central. Look out for that. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.